Of course, all of these cities are starting to be worried, guys. Of course, I think it's mandatory. I'm not really sure if anyone actually thought that this was even an option, right? All these cities that were once sanctuary cities that are now deciding that being a sanctuary city is not actually advantageous to their future, right? They're now starting to worry, right? They're wondering, I wonder if we will even still be here in a decade, or will we turn into what Detroit turned into, 90s and 80s and early 2000s, right? Our once great cities have fallen, right? Will that happen? I mean, no one really expected for people to be coming to the southern border at the rate that they actually did, and then basically metastasizing throughout the nation, guys. I'm not sure. They did. Who was ready for that? Were you? I wasn't, right? Now imagine, all of these smaller cities are also getting some of these people coming in, right? And, obviously draining the resources that were paid into by the actual residents themselves. How many more schools need to close to basically be converted into some type of migrant shelter? How many more? Right? I'm guessing this is probably the overall tipping point of the overwhelming majority of cities that are currently being bombarded, guys. They're going to start voting, obviously, differently than they were before. Yeah, they voted for these people. Absolutely. That allowed this to happen. Something tells me that things are going to be changing come election time. In many of these major cities, mainly New York and Chicago, guys. It's going to happen. Most likely San Diego also, specifically. Denver, Seattle, all of the cities that are currently being bombarded in a way that is absolutely troubling. Right? But the name of the video is, Will the Immigration Crisis Bankrupt U.S. Cities? This is a suggestion via Discord. Let's check it out.
We have this international crisis that really requires federal intervention that local government is being asked to subsidize. Local government is not designed or built to handle such a crisis. Being asked.
See these walls right here? They can't get through these. But they can definitely, put things over the razor wire and climb above it. So it looks like we need more of these. But all right.
To subsidize. Local government is not designed or built to handle such a crisis.
Definitely both a humanitarian crisis for the migrants that are arriving, and it is creating a fiscal crisis for the city.
I don't see an ending to this. This issue will destroy New York City.
The present migrant crisis is quite unprecedented, both in scale, in the diversity.
Well, you see how they're just putting things over the razor wire and just climbing over it? This is what I'm referring to. They're not scaling those 20 to 30 foot walls, bro.
Of the nationalities that are coming to the border and the impact it's having not only on the border states, but in the states and cities inside the country.
I think it's at this point politically unsustainable for the Biden administration to maintain this unlimited flow into what's essentially a welfare state network of cities like New York and Denver and Chicago.
Right.
So how long can cities withstand the recent surge of migrants? And what do they need to end the crisis?
We have to first acknowledge that there is a crisis, because if you don't acknowledge a crisis, you can't be in a crisis mode. We have to be in a crisis mode.
And this crisis is expensive. In 2018, New York City spent roughly $258 million to fund its immigration services, adjusted for inflation. By fiscal year 2023, the city had spent $1.47 billion servicing those seeking asylum. The city of Chicago spent over $194 million on its new arrivals mission since October 2022. Denver is estimated to have spent between $36.3 million to $39.1 million on migrant support services in 2023.
The three biggest items for expenses for new arrivals is housing, education, and healthcare. And they're all three high-ticket items.
The idea that we could have a generous system of welfare benefits from health to education and so on, and allow the entire world to access those benefits is just mathematically impossible.
Yeah,
so we're starting to see...
It's not viable, guys.
...the math not adding up in state after state.
The sheer volume of newly arrived migrants is a major reason behind the city's struggles. In fiscal year 2022, just over 817,000 new cases were filed in immigration courts across the U.S. That number exploded to nearly 1.5 million new cases the following fiscal year.
And guys, if you actually look at the actual, one second. Let's go ahead and give you this here, just so you can see it for now. Like if you actually look at the actual chart itself, like think about what was going on during all of this here. 2008, I'm actually surprised it wasn't a little bit higher than that, but this here was the 19. This is when the world shut down, right? And then obviously when the world shuts down and America basically closes everything and doesn't allow like other nations access to our actual wealth, what happens is these other places that were basically there to exist to make products for the United States of America, they also started failing. Then obviously people started leaving, right, in big numbers. Now, when everything started opening up again, right, obviously around these times here, internationally, look at the flooding, because this is what this event in our history did to the world. It's not just us, right? It's not just them. It's basically the entire world that actually suffered, bro, during the 19, guys. And this is a result of that exact situation.
The particular background of current migrants also plays a role.
Meaning, really quickly, if we're all suffering through this crazy inflationary event where they printed like basically $40 billion, guys, right? A crazy amount of money. If we're suffering through that, imagine what the rest of the world is suffering through. And now all of these people are now flooding the border because of it, right? Because their countries are way worse than ours, right? But again, I'm not sure that's a good enough reason for us to have to take the world's population, specifically with so many people that are in fact homeless and suffering themselves in the United States of America, bro. Right.
The secret sauce of migration has worked in the past is that people would come and they would not depend on the city and state for settling them. They would depend on their social network. Right. It seems in this case, many of the people coming in are coming where they're not such inbuilt connections. Venezuelans which is the largest source of nationality of the new migrants. It's particularly true that they don't have inbuilt connections. They're not, Venezuelan communities are long standing. So they therefore, in the absence of private source of comfort for them, then they become dependent on the states and the cities. And the states and the cities have limited resources.
Although immigration has primarily been an area of federal oversight, experts say there just isn't enough federal funding for cities to work with.
The current level of federal funding provided to state and local governments is a drop in the bucket compared to the need. Congress has provided a very small amount of money of $800 million for a FEMA program for the entire country for last fiscal year to provide assistance to cities in aiding these newcomers.
But cities say this isn't enough.
It's not.
For instance, the $145 million allocated to New York City is less than 10% of what the city spent on migrant services in fiscal year 2023.
This is a whole spectrum of services needed for people who are new to a place, new to a country, new to a city. Everything from finding warm clothes for them, to finding jobs for them, to finding shelter for them. These are complicated issues to manage. So the city, the state, and the federal government, frankly, was not prepared for it.
Texas is providing charter buses to send these illegal immigrants who have been dropped off by the Biden administration to Washington, D.C. We are sending them to the United States Capitol, where the Biden administration will be able to more immediately address the needs of the people that they are allowing to come across our border.
So the historians will probably record the current migrant crisis as a chapter of busing migrants. This kind of coordinated, dramatic busing of asylum seekers from the border to the cities inside the countries is completely unprecedented.
Since the first bus of migrants to Washington, D.C., Texas reported it has transported over 100,000 migrants to cities such as New York City, Chicago, Philadelphia, Denver, and Los Angeles. In 2023, illegal immigration is estimated to have cost Texas taxpayers $13.4 billion.
And that's crazy.
According to the Texas newsroom, the state spent over $148 million busing migrants to sanctuary cities as of January 24, 2024. The Office of the Governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, did not respond to CNBC's request for an interview.
He's not giving you an interview, bro. At all.
The two motives, I think, behind it were, one, simply necessity that Texas doesn't have the resources to cope with 150,000 people a day being released into the state. It's a big state, it's a reasonably wealthy state, but they just simply don't have the schools, the hospitals, the roads, the housing to cope with that kind of influx.
The staggering new record, more migrants crossed into the U.S. on Monday than any other day in history.
The current crisis of forced displacement is a global phenomenon. There are more people displaced worldwide than ever before, and 1 out of every 5 displaced people is in the Americas.
But there's also pull factors, is that people have come to realize that if they reach the United States border and they seek asylum, then they'll be let in. And then their hearing will not happen for 7 years, during which time they are authorized
Free to
to work
move.
in the United States.
Right.
And they won't be deported. And that has, I think, become a very important magnet.
Second of all, it's to make a point that those cities and states like New York and Los Angeles and San Francisco that claim that they are sanctuaries where anyone from anywhere in the world has the right to go there and live, those cities should put up or shut up.
In a strategy reminiscent of former President Trump's suggestions for managing undocumented migrants, other southern states like Arizona and Florida have also engaged in the practice of flying and busing migrants to sanctuary cities and states. Sanctuary cities refer to a community with a policy, written or unwritten, that discourages law enforcement from reporting an individual's immigration status unless it involves a serious crime.
Like, guys, when I first heard this, right, now keep this in mind. So I've definitely immigrated and migrated to multiple countries within my life. I've been moving around forever. My most recent immigration was in Europe, right? And I can definitely tell you right now, when I heard of the concept of a sanctuary city many, many years ago, I was like, okay, what's the big deal, right? But now, do I understand the errors in the concept of a sanctuary city? I think there are definitely multiple sanctuary cities that I've encountered, at least in Europe, that just seem to just not care. Like, every single person in these cities are American. I'm telling you, they just don't want nothing to do with America any longer. So they just completely moved away, and you walk through these places in a country that doesn't speak English, and all of a sudden you hear Southern accents, Northern accents, Midwestern accents, and things like that. It's interesting place to be, right? But I'm saying all this to say this here. When I first heard about Sanctuary City probably a decade ago, I was just like, okay, does it really matter, right? Again, I don't live anywhere near the border, right? So I don't think I knew enough to even really truthfully care about it. Just being honest here. But now, kind of going back, I think that was absolutely foolish. The concept of just letting people flood regions after people have been paying into these areas for a very long time to try to build them up for their family and be able to live in a safe and healthy, thriving community, right? Just for all of this to happen, right? And don't get me wrong, I never even thought about it actually happening every single day in Texas. I think if I would have, I probably would have been looking at the situation initially completely different. But now with all this brand new information, you guys keep sending me videos on this topic. So, I'm definitely starting to learn a lot about it. And I can definitely tell you that I'm not sure that these sanctuary cities or people that are in cities that would call themselves sanctuary cities even knew of what was actually happening, right? Now they do. Okay. And I think the fact is here, a lot of these, let's say the coastal elites, right? They will, in fact, have to change their mind about this now. Absolutely. There will be a reckoning where no place will call themselves this, because why would they? We have to, under every single circumstance, secure the border, bro.
They want more people in their sanctuary cities. Well, we'll give them more people. We can give them a lot. We can give them an unlimited supply. And let's see if they're so happy. They say we have open arms. They're always saying they have open arms. Let's see if they have open arms.
The actions of southern states have been criticized as a political stunt.
I think it's politically motivated. I mean, it's certainly not coming out of the goodness of heart or for the concern of the migrants.
No, it's not. It's not. But I want you to understand something here. The only way this point can be proven is by this. Other than that, these people would have still been like me years ago, right? Mentally, at least. If you don't see something, you don't care about it. Just being honest here. If you don't see something happening constantly, you're not going to legislate against it, and you're also not really going to care too much about it. This has to happen. Is it political? In fact, it is in fact political. Is it extremely amazing to do to use humans like this? Not really, right? But the only way this is going to stop is if this continues to happen. So I'm gonna go ahead and say, just let it happen, bro. Just let it happen, because the only way this will stop is by doing this.
I mean, if the governor of Texas was concerned about migrants, which he alleged he was by busing them, then he would have consulted the mayors and the governors of the places he was sending them to. And he would have said, look, this is a new national crisis. Let's all go together to President Biden and say this is a national crisis.
But they wouldn't.
Where the federal government has to take the lead in providing a solution. Instead of doing that, he just made it a political ploy for these cities to feel the pressure.
It's not just a publicity stunt. He is, yes, sharing the burden with states that have said that they can absorb it, but he's also trying to remove people from his state that he simply doesn't have the resources to cope with.
Critics also point out that the lack of coordination from Texas has made it more difficult for sanctuary cities to deal with the crisis.
If it happens slowly and organically, it's easier to deal with. When it happens in a spurt, and I think that's what happened in the case of the major northeastern cities, where in the new chapter of busing, a lot of migrants showed up. It was unexpected and unplanned for.
Well, what warning does Texas get when
None.
300,000 people cross over every month? I think it's a bit rich for the mayors of cities up north to say, well, hang on a minute, can you guys just slow things down, give us some more warning, let us sort it out? I think that's a ploy. I think they should be talking to the White House, because the White House has control over the flow. Texas doesn't have any control whatsoever.
Bro, what they need to do is start sending everyone, instead of to all these major cities. I understand, right? You sent them specifically to places that generally have the largest voice, right? That's what you did, right? You would have sent them to Chicago. I get that. You sent 300,000 people to Chicago. That's a little crazy, but you know what? Listen, they have a lot of pull on the national stage. You would have sent them to New York City. The same thing. What you should have done is just sent them all to Washington, D.C. A straight line of buses. Send them straight to D.C., right? And to have all these encampments right outside the White House, right? Similar to how the Europeans, I think they were French, they decided to protest in a way that was super interesting. They decided to grab like manure and start spraying it into all of the buildings in their government, right? I mean, because it's their building, right? But understand what I'm saying here. You need to basically flood that entire region, and then you'll be fine. There will be something happening almost instantly.
As pressure continues, cities like Chicago and New York have begun putting more restrictions on migrant drop-offs to stem the flow. In January 2024, Mayor Adams also announced a lawsuit against charter companies hired by Texas to transport migrants into the city. But what cities say they need the most right now is federal assistance.
I think the federal government was late coming to this. We should have developed a mechanism for reimbursing impacted states and cities early on. Unless we get the reimbursement scheme under control, I think cities will suffer for a long time.
Even sanctuary cities that said, come one, come all, are now begging the Biden administration to unloose the coffers and get them more federal money, which is why it's become such a big issue in Washington, because you're asking essentially a Congress that passed laws that explicitly ban what the president is doing in terms of catching and releasing people at the border and his parole programs. You're asking that same Congress that's watching the laws that it wrote be flouted to pony up $20 billion or more to go to grants for people crossing the border, to provide services in many cases that are not provided to American citizens. So it's become politically contentious.
The Biden administration told CNBC that they were unable to accommodate an interview with CNBC.
Of course not.
The Department of Homeland Security said that it is coordinating with cities and states across the country to identify ways it can continue to maximize its support for local communities, while enforcing the law and returning or removing those without a legal basis to remain in the country.
Even though the United States is, what, 34 trillion in the hole and growing at over $1 trillion a year of deficit, we do at least print money and we can make more of it. Cities and states, on the other hand, are not so blessed. Lots of cities like...
Yeah, bro, but that's the reason why a lot of these other nations are trying to leave the U.S. dollar. We're printing too much money. Earlier I said billion, I in fact meant trillion. Apologies, guys, right? But this is the reason why they're trying to not allow their currency to be backed at all on the U.S. dollar based on this inflationary event, obviously, and secondly, the fact that a lot of these other nations, these BRICS nations, referring to Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, these nations are trying to leave the U.S. dollar. They are afraid that we may eventually sanction them if we don't like what they're doing. So there are two reasons why these nations are trying to leave, and a lot of it is, I'll say the majority of it is based off of how we're inflating it. We're just printing money out of nowhere, bro. All right, fiat currencies are solid, sure, but they're not that solid. They're not solid enough to print 16 to $20 trillion on top of our national debt, bro.
Chicago, New York are getting into some pretty serious debt. What tends to happen is there's a snowball effect. You know, the city will turn to the state and ask for a bailout, and then the state will turn to the federal government and ask for a bailout. So the solvency of our big cities and our states is definitely in question.
For some experts, containing the flow of immigration is vital in solving the current crisis.
The busing from Texas is a tiny, tiny fraction of the number of people who are going to cities in the rest of the country.
We have to certainly limit the number of asylum seekers who come to the border.
For others, it's about fixing the immigration system that's long been broken.
Unless we have a more orderly system with incentives for people to come here and regular, actually accessible pathways in the region, we will continue to see irregular migration, and we will continue to see people without the durable status that they need to more quickly be able to sustain themselves and also contribute to our economy and our economic growth.
However, the continued politicization of immigration will only make the issue more difficult to address.
The more we politicize and weaponize this issue, the less likely it is that we will solve it.
I'm an immigrant myself. I came here when I was 6. This country was built by immigration, but it was also built by laws. And ultimately, the number of people that come into this country and the terms under which they come is a decision that's made by our elected officials. If we allow a veto to the entire world to just bypass our laws and do whatever they want, then we've lost our sovereignty, our national sovereignty, and we've lost the rule of law. So I regret that the argument isn't a debate between left and right about what immigration levels are in the interests of the United States as a whole, and we come up with a compromise where no one's happy. Instead, we just stay in our corners and sling mud at each other, and meanwhile, the border's wide open and no one's happy.
Yep. That's honest. That's super honest, right? There needs to be more than just one side yelling, and the other side being like, you're wrong, you don't like people, these type of things, right? There needs to be a little bit more than that. Because, in fact, while the arguing is happening and while the madness is occurring, what exactly is happening at the border? Nothing. It's just wide open. Right. I mean, there's no real benefit in that. There needs to be something that can be actionably done. All right. Absolutely. Something. Maybe if it's just stopping giving these people things. I don't know. Maybe. Right. That could probably stop people because, like, listen, a lot of people come because they see how much money the U.S. government or all these cities are actually investing into these individuals. And they're like, wow, it would take me half a year to make this amount of money. These are real realities of some of the migrants that are coming. Understand that. Like, specifically ones from Venezuela. Like, what they're getting is more than they had. Like, a lot more than they had. Right? So all you have to do is tell other people from Venezuela, hey, come. Right? So yeah, and then there are obviously some people that are actually fleeing like straight persecution, specifically the ones from China. I get it, right? Then also the ones that are coming from the failed state known as Haiti, being currently ran by barbecue, right? So just keep this in mind here, guys. Right? The world is in absolute trouble. It is, but we can't be exclusively responsible for that. Even though we have, in fact, told all the world, not all the world. Well, yeah, I guess we have told all the world. If something happens, we can come and save you. We have, because we said that, right? Maybe that's also the reason why they're coming, right? Maybe we just need to be just slightly more insular, so we can kind of fix some of the things that are actually happening within the nation. Right, the right hates the left hates the right. It's all just absolute wildness consistently. And what's happening? The border's still open. That's it. Right. All right. But all right, listen. You guys all have an absolutely amazing day. Enjoy your day thoroughly, guys. Before we go, are you guys subscribed to the other channels? Logical Movie Reviews with Mr. L. Boyd, along with Mr. L. Boyd Music. Both are found in the description. Check it out.